The church bells tolled, their echoes slicing through the humid Tennessee air, but I barely heard them over the scream of my own heart. I stood in the shadowed pews of Grace Covenant Church, staring at Pastor Elias Hawthorne, his voice of velvet thunder preaching salvation to a rapt congregation. His eyes, though, those piercing blue eyes, found mine, and in that fleeting second I knew I was damned. My name is Caleb Monroe, 22, a mechanic's son from a nowhere town called Bethel Springs. I'd grown up under Elias's sermons, his words shaping my world like gospel carved in stone. He was 35, a pillar of faith, married to a kind woman named Ruth, with a daughter who called me Big Brother when we played in the churchyard. But that night, under the flickering light of a harvest moon, everything I thought I knew about him and myself would unravel. It started innocently enough, or so I told myself. I've been helping Elias with the church's community outreach, delivering food to families hit hard by the factory layoffs. We'd drive out in his old pickup, the cab filled with the scent of pine and his quiet humming of hymns. I'd always admired him, his conviction, his warmth, the way he made everyone feel seen. But lately, his glances lingered too long. His hand brushed mine when passing a crate, and my pulse would betray me, racing like I'd sinned just by standing near him. That evening, we'd finished our deliveries and parked by Lake Willow, a secluded spot where the water mirrored the stars. The air was thick with cicadas, their song a reckless chorus to our silence. Elias turned off the engine, and we sat, the weight of something unspoken pressing against us. "Caleb," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, "do you ever feel like you're hiding from God?" I froze. His words weren't a sermon. They were a confession. I looked at him, his profile sharp against the moonlight, and saw a man wrestling with something deeper than faith. Every day, I admitted, my voice cracking. I'd known since I was 16 that I wasn't like the other boys in Bethel Springs. I'd buried it, prayed it away, but the truth clawed its way back every time Elias smiled at me. He turned to me then, his eyes searching mine, and I saw the same fear, the same longing I'd carried in secret. "I've tried to be good," he said, his voice trembling. "I've tried to be the man they all expect. But when I'm with you," he stopped, his breath hitching. "I feel alive." The world tilted. I wanted to run, to scream that this was wrong, that he was my pastor, my guide, my father's friend. But my body betrayed me, leaning closer, drawn to the heat of his presence. His hand reached out, tentative, and brushed my cheek. It was a touch so soft it felt like a prayer, but it burned like sin. I closed my eyes, and when his lips met mine, the universe shattered. We pulled back, gasping, the weight of what we'd done crashing over us. "This can't happen," Elias whispered, but his hand stayed on my face, trembling. "It already has," I said, my voice raw. The lake stretched out before us, silent and vast, a witness to our rebellion. I knew then that we were on a path we couldn't unchoose, one that would either save us or destroy us. The days that followed were a blur of stolen glances and sleepless nights. I'd see Elias at church, his sermons as fervent as ever, but his eyes carried a secret only I could read. We didn't speak of that night, but it lived in every brush of our hands, every moment we found ourselves alone. I was falling, not just for him, but into a truth I denied for years. I was gay, and the man I loved was bound by vows to his wife, his church, his God. Bethel Springs was a small town, its pulse tied to the church. Gossip was currency, and suspicion was a blade. I noticed the way Mrs. Carter, the choir director, watched us when we lingered too long after service. I saw the frown on my father's face when I mentioned working late with Elias. The town was a pressure cooker, and we were the spark threatening to ignite it. One evening, as we sorted donations in the church basement, Elias broke the silence. "Caleb, we need to stop this before it goes further." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed his pain. "I can't keep lying to Ruth, to myself. This isn't who I'm supposed to be." "Then who are you?" I snapped, anger flaring. "The man who kissed me, or the one pretending it never happened? He flinched, and I hated myself for it, but I couldn't stop. I'm not asking you to leave her, Elias. I'm asking you to be honest with yourself. He stepped closer, his voice a desperate whisper. You think I don't want to? You think I don't lie awake imagining a world where I could love you openly? But this town, this life, it'll destroy us both. His hand hovered near mine, then fell. I'm not strong enough. I wanted to argue, to beg, but the truth in his words silenced me. We were trapped, not just by the town, but by the weight of who we were supposed to be. I left the basement that night, my heart a tangle of love and rage, knowing we were hurtling towards something we couldn't control. The next Sunday, the air in the church felt heavier, as if the walls themselves knew our secret. Elias's sermon was about temptation, his voice strained, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was preaching to himself. After the service, Ruth approached me, her smile warm but her eyes sharp. "Caleb, you've been such a help to Elias," she said, her tone too careful. "But don't let him lean on you too much. He's got a family to think of." Her words were a warning, and they cut deep. I nodded, my throat tight, and watched her walk away, her arm linked with Elias's. That night, I sat by Lake Willow alone, the stars mocking me with their indifference. I loved him, and it was tearing me apart. But worse, I knew he loved me too, and that truth was a fire neither of us could escape. The weeks that followed were a tightrope walk over a chasm of guilt and desire. Elias and I avoided being alone, but the pull between us was a living thing, undeniable and relentless. Every Sunday, I sat in the pews, my eyes fixed on him as he preached, his words about grace and redemption slicing through me like a blade. I wanted to believe in the forgiveness he spoke of, but all I could feel was the sin of wanting him. Bethel Springs was suffocating. The town's eyes seemed to follow me everywhere. Mrs. Carter's pursed lips at the grocery store, my father's quiet questions about why I was so distracted. I started skipping youth group, unable to face Elias's daughter, Lily, who still tugged at my sleeve, asking me to play. Each avoidance was a brick in the wall I was building to protect myself, but it only made the ache worse. One night, after a long shift at the garage, I found Elias waiting by my truck. His face was pale, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "We need to talk," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my heart pounding, and we drove to Lake Willow again, the only place that felt like ours. The moon was full, casting a silver glow over the water, and I hated how beautiful it was, how it mocked the ugliness inside me. "Caleb," he began, staring at the lake, "I've been praying for answers, for strength, but all I see is you." His words hit like a punch, stealing my breath. I've spent my life building this role, this family, this faith. But when I'm with you, it all feels like a lie. "Then leave it," I said, my voice shaking with a boldness I didn't know I had. "Leave the lie, Elias. Be who you are." I stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat of him, and his eyes locked on mine, raw and unguarded. "You don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. "If I do this, I lose everything. Ruth, Lily, the church, they're my life." He reached for my hand, then stopped himself, his fingers curling into a fist. "But you, my truth." I didn't think. I closed the distance between us, my lips finding his, desperate and reckless. This kiss was different, fierce, hungry, a defiance of every rule we'd been taught. His hands gripped my shoulders, pulling me closer, and for a moment, the world was just us, the lake, and the stars. But when we broke apart, reality crashed back. "We can't keep doing this," he whispered, his forehead pressed against mine. "Someone's going to find out." He was right. The next day, I caught Mrs. Carter whispering to another congregant, her eyes flicking toward me. My father cornered me at dinner, his voice gruff. "You're spending too much time with that pastor, Caleb. People are talking." I brushed it off, but the fear was a knot in my chest. Bethel Springs was a small town, and secrets didn't stay buried long. Elias started pulling away. He canceled our outreach runs, citing a busy schedule, and his sermons grew sharper, filled with warnings about straying from the path. I felt like a ghost in his presence, invisible yet haunting him. I tried to move on, to focus on work, but every night I drive to Lake Willow, hoping he'd show up. He never did. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Friday, the air thick with the promise of rain. I was closing up the garage when my phone buzzed, a text from Elias. "Meet me at the lake. Please." My heart leapt, a mix of hope and dread. I drove there, the wipers slashing through the first drops of rain, and found him standing by the water, soaked and shivering. "I can't do this anymore," he said as I approached, his voice raw. "I can't keep pretending I don't love you." The words were a lightning strike, electrifying and terrifying. I reached for him, but he stepped back, his eyes wild. "Ruth knows something's wrong. She's been asking questions. I think she suspects." "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the rain. "I'm saying I'm scared, Caleb. Scared of losing her, of losing Lily, of losing myself. But I'm more scared of losing you." He grabbed my hand, his grip desperate, and pulled me close. The rain poured over us, but I didn't care. I kissed him, tasting salt and storm, and for the first time, I felt like we could be more than a secret. But secrets have a way of breaking free. The next morning, I woke to a voicemail from my father. "Caleb, we need to talk. Now." His tone was ice, and I knew. Someone had seen us. The town was whispering, and the walls we'd built were crumbling. The confrontation came like a storm. My father sat me down in our cramped living room, his face carved with disappointment. "Mrs. Carter saw you and Pastor Hawthorne by the lake last night," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "She says it didn't look right. Tell me she's wrong, Caleb." I wanted to lie, to say it was a misunderstanding, but the truth was a weight I couldn't carry anymore. "She's not wrong," I said, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at me. His eyes widened, then narrowed, and for the first time in my life, I saw disgust in the way he looked at me. "You're confused," he said, standing abruptly. "You need to stay away from him. He's a married man, a pastor. This is a sin, Caleb, and you know it." His words were a blade, cutting deeper because they echoed the guilt I'd carried for years. I left the house without a word, my heart pounding, and drove to the church, needing to see Elias. He was in his office, papers scattered across his desk, his face pale and drawn. "They know," he said before I could speak. "Ruth confronted me this morning. She saw us drive off last night. She's devastated." I sank into a chair, the world spinning. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice small. "I don't know," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. I told her I'd pray on it, that I'd seek guidance, but he looked at me, his eyes filled with a pain I'd never seen. "I can't lose my family, Caleb, but I can't lose you either." The church felt like a cage, its stained glass windows casting judgmental shadows. We sat in silence, the weight of our choices suffocating us. Then the door burst open, and Ruth stood there, her eyes red and furious. "How could you?" she spat, her voice trembling. "You're supposed to be a man of God, Elias. And you," she turned to me, her gaze cutting. "You were like family." I wanted to apologize, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. Elias stood, his hands raised as if to calm her, but she stepped back. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm taking Lily, and we're going to my mother's. Figure out what you're going to tell the congregation." She left, the door slamming behind her, and the silence that followed was deafening. Elias sank back in his chair, his face buried in his hands. "I've ruined everything," he whispered. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him we could fix this, but the truth was we'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross. The town would know by morning. Mrs. Carter would make sure of that. The next day, the church was a battlefield. Whispers followed me as I walked through the parking lot, eyes boring into me like accusations. The congregation was gathered for an emergency meeting, and I knew what was coming. Elias stood at the pulpit, his face a mask of resolve, but his hands trembled as he gripped the podium. "I've failed you," he began, his voice steady but heavy. I've failed as a pastor, as a husband, as a man of faith. I've been struggling with feelings I was taught to deny, feelings for someone I care about deeply. The room erupted in gasps, murmurs, and a few shouted protests. I sat in the back, my heart in my throat, as he continued. I'm stepping down, effective immediately. I need to find my truth, and I can't do that here. The room was chaos, but I couldn't look away from him. He was breaking every rule, not just for me, but for himself. When he left the pulpit, he didn't look back, and I followed him out, ignoring the stares and whispers. Outside, he turned to me, his eyes wet. I don't know what's next, Caleb, he said, but I know I can't keep lying. We drove to Lake Willow, the only place that felt safe. The water was still, reflecting the gray sky, and we sat on the shore, our shoulders touching. I'm sorry, I said, my voice thick. I didn't mean to ruin your life. You didn't, he said, his hand finding mine. You show me who I am, and that's worth everything. His words were a lifeline, but the fear lingered. We were free, but at what cost? Bethel Springs turned on us like a wildfire. By Monday, the town was ablaze with gossip. Elias's resignation was the spark, and my name was fuel. My father wouldn't look at me, and my mother left tearful voicemails begging me to fix myself. At the garage, my boss cut my hours, citing customer concerns. The church, once my sanctuary, was now a place of exile. Elias was no better off. Ruth had taken Lily to her mother's in Knoxville, and the congregation was split. Some called for forgiveness, others for damnation. Mrs. Carter led the charge, her voice loud at the diner, calling Elias a hypocrite and me a homewrecker. I wanted to scream that it wasn't that simple, that love wasn't a choice, but no one would listen. We met in secret, stealing moments at Lake Willow or in the back of his truck, parked in the woods. Each touch was a rebellion, each kiss a defiance, but the weight of the town's judgment was crushing. We should leave, I said one night, my head on his chest, the stars above us indifferent. Start over somewhere new. He was quiet for a long time, his fingers tracing circles on my arm. I want that, he said finally, but I can't abandon Lily. And Ruth, she deserves better than this. His voice cracked, and I felt the guilt he carried, a mirror to my own. We were in love, but it came at a cost neither of us had fully grasped. Then came the letter. It was slipped under my door, and signed but written in a sharp, angry scrawl. Leave town, or we'll make you. I showed it to Elias, and his face hardened. They're scared, he said, scared of what they don't understand. But I saw the fear in his eyes too, and it mirrored mine. The threats escalated. My truck's tires were slashed, and Elias found a brick through his office window with a note calling him an abomination. We reported it to the sheriff, but he just shrugged, saying small towns had their ways. I felt like a trapped animal, cornered and desperate. But Elias was resolute. We're not running, he said, his voice firm. This is our home too. He started meeting with a few supportive congregants, people who'd known him for years and saw beyond scandal. They were a small group, but their kindness was a lifeline. One of them, an older woman named Margaret, invited us to her farm for dinner. You're not alone, she said, her eyes kind but fierce. God loves you both, no matter what the others say. Her words were a balm, but they couldn't erase the hate. One night, as we sat by the lake, Elias turned to me, his face lit by moonlight. I've been thinking about what you said, about starting over. I want that, Caleb. I want a life where we don't have to hide. His voice was steady, but his eyes were pleading. But I need to make things right with Ruth and Lily first. I nodded, my throat tight. I'll wait, I said, and I meant it. I loved him enough to give him time, even if it broke me. We kissed, slow and tender, and for a moment, the world was just us. But the threats were a shadow we couldn't outrun, and I knew our time in Bethel Springs was running out. The breaking point came on a cold October night. I was walking home from the garage when a truck roared up behind me, its headlights blinding. 3 men jumped out, their faces hidden by shadows and hate. Faggot, one spat, and before I could react, a fist connected with my jaw. I hit the ground, pain exploding in my skull, and their boots found my ribs. I curled up, gasping as they shouted slurs, their voices a vicious chorus. I don't know how long it lasted, but when they finally left, I was bloodied and shaking, the taste of iron in my mouth. I stumbled to Elias's house, my vision blurring. He opened the door, his face crumpling when he saw me. "Caleb," he whispered, pulling me inside. He cleaned my wounds, his hands gentle but trembling, and I saw the rage in his eyes, mixed with guilt. "This is my fault," he said, his voice thick with tears. "I should have protected you." "It's not your fault," I said, gripping his hand. "It's theirs. It's this town." But the truth was, I was scared, not just for me, but for him. If they'd come for me, they'd come for him too. The next day, Elias made a decision. He called Ruth, asking her to meet him in Knoxville. He didn't tell me what he said, but when he returned, his eyes were red but resolute. "I told her everything," he said. "I told her I love you, that I've always been this way, even if I couldn't admit it. She's hurt, but she wants what's best for Lily. We're working on a custody plan." I stared at him, hope and fear warring in my chest. "And the church?" I asked. "I'm done with it," he said. "Not with faith, but with pretending to be someone I'm not. I want to live, Caleb, with you." His words were a promise, and I clung to them like a lifeline. We left Bethel Springs a week later, our belongings packed into his truck. The threats had grown bolder, and we knew staying was no longer an option. We drove west, toward a small town in Oregon where a friend of Margaret's had offered us a place to stay. The drive was long, filled with quiet moments and stolen kisses at gas stations, but it felt like freedom. When we arrived, the town was nothing like Bethel Springs. It was small but open, with rainbow flags in shop windows, and people who smiled without judgment. We found a little house by a river, and for the first time, we could hold hands without looking over our shoulders. Elias started working as a counselor, using his compassion to help others, and I found a job at a local garage. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Lily visited us that summer, her laughter filling the house as we taught her to fish in the river. Ruth was distant but civil, and I respected her for it. She was rebuilding her life, just as we were. Elias and I grew closer, our love no longer a secret but a foundation. We fought, we laughed, we built a life, one where we could be whole. Looking back, I think of that night by Lake Willow, when Elias broke every rule to touch me. It was the start of our unraveling, but also our becoming. Love, I learned, isn't just a feeling. It's a choice, a fight, a truth worth every bruise. And as I sit on our porch, Elias's hand in mine, the river flowing before us, I know we chose right.